We are very happy that you're joining us tonight for our junior high school focused town hall to talk about our reopening plans to bring our junior high students back on campus. As you can see, we have several members of our Board of Trustees. We have Brian Johnson, Vaishali Surke, Jessica Spicer, and Steve Talio here. They, I think, are just going to be observers of the town hall. We also have our junior high school principals, Bhavna Narula from Block and Keith Rocha from Egan. We have Jennifer Kiker, who is our Director of Special Education, and we have Erin Green, who is our Director of Student and Staff Services, and we have Randy Kenyon, who is our Business Assistant Superintendent of Business Services. And Jeff, I think, is trying to connect via audio. He will be in and out and also at a city council meeting in Mountain View. So we are here tonight to talk about our plans and most importantly to answer any questions that our community has around our reopening plans for junior high school. Marcy, if you want to get the presentation started, we thought we would kind of review the 7-8 portion of the presentation that we gave to the board last week with a little status update because, as you know, a couple of things have changed over the last 24, 48 hours or so. So next slide, Marcy. So before we launch into the actual plans of bringing our junior high school students back on campus, of course, we wanted to let everybody know, if I'm sure you're already aware, but Santa Clara County did move into that purple widespread area today officially. So we have some additional closures happening throughout the county and modifications to our county-wide reopenings. But we wanted to talk a little bit about what that means for us and our process moving forward. And it's still a little bit unclear. So the way we are choosing to move forward right now is we are continuing to plan for a January 20th return of students. We will be working closely with County Public Health, with the County Office of Education to really understand exactly when we will be returning students onto campus at our junior high schools. You know, our elementary program is in full swing, and we have our next group of students returning on, oh boy, somebody help me out, December 7th, I want to say, but my dates might be messed up there, December 4th, perhaps. And we will be continuing with that. But when we talk about junior high school, we're really looking to plan for that January 20th return. Between now, it's 2 months away. And as you know, in COVID timelines, things change so rapidly. So we will continue to monitor the information as we get closer to January. But the most important piece for us and for parents to understand is that timeline for the decision from families will remain at December 7th. And that information is really critical. We'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. But in order to create the schedule and those changes for our junior high school students, we really need that information by each and every family by December 7th. So we will get into those details at the end of the presentation tonight before questions. Next slide. Probably the next slide too. So I am going to hand it off to Keith and Bhavna, who are, oh no, I'm sorry, I do the first couple of slides. So as we think about reopening our junior high schools when the time is right, it's this fine balance between health and safety for students and for our staff, and that need to bring students back in person. And those of us who've been working with kids and families at home, you know that that need for socialization is greater, possibly for any age group that we serve for our junior high school students. So we are looking forward to bringing our students back in person, those who choose to opt into that in-person program, because we know it's so critical for students to build that social and emotional health and wellness. And many of our students are feeling isolated right now due to the pandemic. So we are happy to have worked through the constraints of the county guidelines to create a plan that we know does this balance very nicely. Next slide. As you know, that organizing principle, you've probably all seen this graphic before in one form or another, but the organizing principle when we talk about our junior high school students is a little bit different than how we are dealing with our elementary students. And it's really based around that physical distancing and mandatory face covering. So it does feel a little bit different for our older students. And so just like all students, staff and students will complete that health screener prior to arriving on campus each and every day when we return in person. And the big difference is for our older kids is that students are assigned to a stable seat, very specific seat within the classroom, and each student has to maintain that 6-foot spacing at all times. That includes coming onto campus, being within the classroom, any outdoor breaks, that all students and staff need to maintain that 6-foot distancing. And so because of that, and we want to minimize the amount of movement among people on campus, our teachers will rotate classrooms and will continue to maintain that 6-foot distance, and students will stay together in their cohort, in their stable seat in the classroom as teachers rotate in. So that principle is a little bit different than how we're running our elementaries currently. Next slide. Now I'm handing it off to Keith and Bhavna to get going through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. I think Bhavna is going to start.
Thank you, Sandra. I just wanted to begin by saying that today we will share sort of some of the behind the scenes work that we've engaged in. I'm sure we can all recognize that reopening junior high is a complex puzzle. So with that in mind, we wanted to bring together a diverse team of teachers and staff members. And as you can see here, Keith and I assembled a diverse team that can bring multiple perspectives. And I have to recognize these team members because it is due to their creativity, their passion, and their investment in making sure that we are building a schedule that works for our students, that works for our staff members, and that also prioritizes safety, that we were able to arrive at an optimal schedule in a less than optimal situation that we are in. Next slide, please, Marcy. All right, so just an insight into the process we engaged in. Our expressed goal was to develop a schedule that would meet the needs of our students, whether they are in a 100% virtual model or in a hybrid model. We also reviewed some staff feedback around this. We also have we brainstormed a series of schedule options, right? We looked high and low. We you know, over 10 probably is an understatement. We had close to 20 schedules that we reviewed. We reviewed the pros and cons of each schedule. We looked around for middle schools that might have opened, you know, for suggested schedules. And then we narrowed our focus around what we prioritized. And what's valuable about this process is that eventually we were able to combine qualities of all these different schedules into one schedule before making the decision. Next slide, please, Marcy. Before we launch into some of the visual examples of our schedule, I want to share our driving principles. I think Sandra started by saying that our one of the pieces that are sort of very present for us and a priority for us is that social emotional learning and support for our students. This can be, while our teachers are doing an amazing job with distance learning, connecting kids, we've built advisory to invest in social emotional learning, it is still virtual. And we know that this age group thrives on connections. So that was a priority and a driving principle for us. We also sort of talked about some robust instructional practices. What would it look like bringing kids on campus and while meeting the needs of our students who have chosen a 100% virtual model. And we wanted to look at practices from a lens of practices that are agile, that can be aligned across virtual through in-person learning, and also focused on skill development you know, ideas like collaboration within the classroom while supporting virtual collaboration as well, an extension of learning within the classroom. So we sort of looked at a variety of instructional practices to design a schedule that would actually allow us to put those practices in place. And then a priority for us was also equity. You know, we sort of from a social justice perspective did not want to cohort the entire school experience of a student by math. We know based on research, based on our teachers' experiences, based on our experience with middle school education, that that is not in the best interest of students. So again, we are trying to build an optimal schedule in a less than optimal situation, and I want to remind us of that. So those were our driving principles. Next slide, please, Marcy. And now let's talk about some of the organizing principles. You know, you've sort of seen this at the board meeting that we presented at as well, but we will be bringing back students for in-person instruction for English, history, science, and then guided study, special education support, but something, and sort of advisory model as well. But something to remember is that we will be embedding social emotional learning through this advisory guided study model and also provide that same support to our special education students. Based on the county guidelines with 6-foot distancing between our desks and 6-foot distancing with the teacher, we are working towards building heterogeneous cohorts of 15 to 18 students. And basically students will be in a classroom cohort will be stable, and that teacher teams will rotate to different classrooms. Math in this model will be completely virtual, but live, and it will be 4 days a week. And as we review the visual examples, you'll be able to see what that would look like over the 4 days of the week. I want to remind us that even in a hybrid model, when students are on our campus 2 days a week, it would be either a Monday, Tuesday, or a Thursday, Friday cohort in person, the learning has 4 days of synchronous instruction. So Monday and Tuesday, for example, you might be in person on campus, but then on Thursday and Friday, when you're at home, you have a longer instructional period with math, but also check-ins and instructional period with your English, history, and science teachers, but they will be live virtual. So it's important to remember that and not think about synchronous instruction just being limited to Monday, Tuesday. The modality is different. You are in person 2 days a week, but then you're still, just like you are right now, live and virtual on your at-home days as well. So advisory will continue to be on Wednesday as only virtual period. And then we are looking into extended day for our At Promise students to support them you know, even more. So they will get the core instruction, but then they will get an extended day as well. And important to know here is that the virtual students, so the 100% virtual, you know, families that have chosen a 100% virtual model for their student will follow the same cohort-based schedule. Next slide, please, Marcy. Again, sort of a reminder that a virtual school model includes all of the instruction online following the same bell schedule as those in the hybrid program. And I want to make a final important point. a junior high student has 6 teachers, sometimes 7 teachers. And so the complexity of building a junior high hybrid model that is cohort based, where each content area is taught by a content area specialist, requires us to make changes to our schedule, given the hybrid schedule we are returning in. So it is quite possible that your student may experience a change in the order of the courses, or they may be assigned to different teachers. And I just want to sort of provide some context to it too. As you know, leaders and teams invested in bringing forth what's best for students, we are going to work towards like, how can we best minimize this? But it may be inevitable in terms of how we might organize this, the new master schedule. But I will also say this, that we have all of the building blocks in place. Our teachers, even across schools, collaborate. They have common assessments. They have common instructional practices. And this is where that value of that Wednesday collaboration comes in. Our teachers align our learning plans across schools, across within the departments. Assessments are common again. So while there may be shifts in their schedules, in student schedules, in a hybrid learning model, and even when you've chosen the 100% virtual model, just know that we have systems in place that allow for a seamless transition in terms of an instructional experience or a school experience of a student. Next slide, please. And I'm going to now invite Mr. Rocha to review some visual examples of what this would look like.
Well, thank you, Ms. Narula. I appreciate you talking us through that. Yes, I have the opportunity to go through some visual examples for you in relation to what we have talked about in regard to our framework schedule. So let me go ahead and start with that. Marcy, next slide, please. All right, so as you take a look at this virtual schedule in this framework, one thing to consider is one of the conversations we had as a reopening task force was that we were looking at the options with regard to helping to support our elementary families as well. And so when you're looking at this model, you want to think about this as cohorts by alphabetical by last name. So if we're looking at a student that is in cohort A, that student likely will be somewhere between letters A through K, A through L, somewhere between there. But if you are the student that's a part of cohort A, then you're going to be arriving to on-campus learning on Mondays and Tuesdays. As you go through your day, times are listed here, but could be adjusted. They're approximate. But as you look through the day, students would be participating in 4 periods. And as Ms. Narula mentioned, we would be going through a science, a history, an English course, along with a support class. During that period of time, students would be receiving embedded SEL components, that social and emotional learning components. Also during the instruction, you might see students having really great conversations, discourse in the classroom, Socratic seminars, talking about scientific reasoning, and really building off of the opportunity to engage in conversation, even though they're 6 feet away. That is a critical aspect of being together in a classroom, and that's something that we really want to capture. Once they rotate, and at the same point, teachers are rotating through each of those periods. At the conclusion of their day, around 12:05-ish, students would be dismissed. They would go home. They would have lunch and then start preparing for their afternoon sessions that would be virtual, but still synchronous. So then they would pop on at about 1:05-ish, and they would go and be a part of their math cohort. I'm sorry, it changed. Marcy, can you go back to the original slide? Yes, and then you can look in the afternoon. They would be part of a virtual math class, virtual PE, and elective course as well. And again, these are all synchronous, happening at the same time. That would happen again on Tuesday, again, starting in person, going through those 4 periods, being dismissed, getting ready for their afternoon sessions, and then logging on for some synchronous learning with their math teacher. On Wednesdays, they would log in as they have been with their advisory course, get some very specific learning around social and emotional supports, strategies, organization, all those great things with their advisory teacher. And then on Thursday and Friday, although they would be at home, they would still have synchronous instruction. One of the pieces of feedback that we got from our community is they were worried that they were not going to have enough synchronous or live instruction. So part of what we've built out is to provide as many synchronous opportunities for students, whether live or virtual. And so this is what you see in the scope. So then again, in this particular cohort, Thursdays, a student would log in, be with their math teacher. And in this case, on a Thursday and a Friday, might have an extended block of time, approximately 70 minutes, 75 minutes. Then they would see their elective and PE teacher in the morning. They would have a lunch break time, and then in the afternoon, they would log on and see their English, history, and science teacher. And that would repeat again on Friday. Next slide. So, and conversely, if I was a student with the letters, we'll go L through Z or N through Z, and I'm part of the hybrid cohort B, next slide, it might look like this, where I begin my day at home on Mondays and Tuesdays with my math block, my PE and elective block, and then finish the day with synchronous teaching in English, history, and science. That would occur again at home on Tuesday. Wednesday, I would have my advisory course, again, learning all those social and emotional components, very specific with the teacher. And then as cohort B student, I would get to come on campus on Thursdays and Fridays and have my live sessions with science, history, and English teachers, along with my support class to help continue supporting me in my social emotional learning, as well as ensuring that I am understanding the material. Then I would go home, have lunch, get ready for the afternoon sessions, and then spend the afternoon with my math and elective teachers and PE. And then I would do that again on Friday. And that would be the conclusion of my week between the two cohorts. So as you can see, there is a lot of synchronous and synchronous instruction happening at least 4 times a day. And that's what we have. Next slide. So this would be in regard to our next steps. So Sandra, would you mind talking about our next steps, please?
Sure, no problem. So as I said at the very start, we do want to make sure that we can hear from all families on their program choice by December 7th. We realized that at the very start, before school started, we asked our junior high families to make a determination if you wanted 100% virtual or if you wanted to be in the blended program. But that data is old and we know more now than we did back in August. So we do really want to hear from each and every one of our families. So you can expect an email later this week from either Keith or from Bhavna with a link to a Google form for you to really make your determination for your child. We encourage you to make a decision based on all of the information you know. It will be a challenge to make programmatic changes between that January 20th date and then our natural switch date in March. So please think about the decision you're making at a minimum is going from that January to March timeframe. So make the best decision for your family. It is the decision that you all know best. You know your child best. Anything you guys want to add about that? Or are we ready to go for questions?
I think we're good for questions.
All right, we are good for questions. So that was.
I know we talked about like that your courses, order of courses might change, teachers might change. Both at Egan and Block, we will be investing heavily on that transition to school all over again in January. So we will be focused on building, each of the 2 schools have sort of a transition experience. Block has a Falcon Camp. So we will be working on building community whether it's classroom or as a whole school, getting into that hybrid or even the virtual model. We understand that we need to rebuild that community, but please know that that would be part of our plans.
Great.
Thank you, Bhavna.
Excellent. Thanks, Bhavna. All right, Marcy. So if you want to, if we can ask our viewers here today who've raised your hand, if you want to ask a question, we're here to answer the questions for you tonight. It is easiest for us after having done several of these, if you can try to focus your questions on 1 or 2 questions and not stack your thing with 7 or 8 different questions. That would be greatly appreciated. So we look forward to answering your questions.
I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. And our first speaker is Miranda Hogendorn.
Hi there. I much appreciate, can you hear me?
Yep, thank you.
Great. I much appreciate all the work that went into this and what the schedule would look like. I do have serious doubts how parents are going to make a decision by December 7th, because at that point we will only just see Thanksgiving numbers come in, and there's another big holiday just around the corner. I really don't know. I mean, I hope, but I won't have any actual information to make a solid decision by December 7th. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, what would school look like if you decide to stay completely virtual?
So maybe I'll start to speak to the first part, and one of you can pick up the second part. I understand the challenge of making a decision for something that's going to happen, a month plus away. You may want to think about it in terms of, and whatever works for you, but like the worst case scenario type of thing for you and your family. And kind of backtrack based on what you believe your comfort level is. So what's happening across the country. We're in much better conditions here in California, but you do see changes happening throughout the country. So if you think of that January to March timeframe, try your best, because the complexity of creating the schedule really does require that amount of time. And what I think that's going to mean is that Keith and Bhavna are probably going to be working much over their winter break to finalize that schedule for January. So the time is certainly a challenge, we understand. You guys want to speak to what virtual school will look like?
Sure, I can speak to that. Hi, Miranda. A virtual student schedule will actually exactly mirror a hybrid student schedule. And the way it would work is we would be potentially building virtual sections into teachers' schedule. Again, that's why that December 7th number is important, because that tells us how many sections, how to staff. And so a virtual student schedule will look like a hybrid student schedule, and will include the live instruction in lieu of being in classroom, right? So there will be live instruction. I want to be clear that I don't think we made it clear in our presentation, but that does not mean live streaming. A teacher will be either teaching in person in a particular class period, or teaching the virtual section in a different class period. And so you can look at the schedule that, the visuals that we shared, and think of sort of your student, even if you're choosing 100% virtual model, following the same cohort-based schedule.
And maybe I'll just add on the student experience, and it will feel like school feels like right now, right? Their schedule might change, but the experience of what they're doing online with teachers and their classmates will be almost identical.
Okay, so it's not going to be like the virtual school for the elementary, where the kids are really part of a completely different experience, or?
Well, our elementary students are enrolled in a virtual school, but their school experience is right now has been similar to their at-home peers who through distance learning. But yeah, we're not enrolling our junior high students into a different virtual school.
Okay. What happens with students that are sick or have to quarantine once they are in a hybrid situation?
So they would have access to the online learning through the learning plans and connect with their teachers remotely kind of during that schedule. So they would obviously miss the in-person experience, but would be able to tune into those check-ins throughout the week.
Okay, I'll leave the floor to somebody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda.
Our next speaker is Andy Barnett.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I have a 7th grader at Egan. I have two questions. My child had a concern, if she was going to be attending hybrid, about whether she would have different teachers, and you mentioned, that's obviously possibly a, something that would happen. Is it going to be? Are we going to be told like which teachers would be teaching virtually and which in person? Like if that were part of our decision, like if she is really attached to a particular teacher, or is it just is it just we're just going to have to see what happens? And then my other question is, I understand that even though we're in purple, it sounds like even though 7th and 8th hasn't started yet, we would still technically be allowed to open. But is there a time, what would be the point where the brakes would be put on and we would, the district would say, we're just not going to be able to start the junior high program in person, if that makes sense?
Maybe I could try to address the first question and somebody can talk about the second part. So, hi, Andy.
Hi.
I think that the challenge that we face is that we don't have the numbers yet. We obviously want to make sure that students are supported, and we'll do our very best to help them remain with teachers, but it's a difficult challenge because it really depends on how many teachers are available for virtual versus in person, and it's really based off of those numbers. So we would hopefully have those numbers by December 7th, and then we could share with families those schedules in early January.
Okay, that makes sense. Just wondering.
And then Andy, I'll take the second one. This is Jeff Bear. With regard to your second question, we are actually in consultation with Santa Clara County Public Health Department to understand the impact on our junior high school and our opening in January with regard to moving into the purple tier. So I can't tell you what that trigger would be, but we're working with the health department right now. And until we hear differently, we're going to continue to move forward on a path to reopen. But so, as soon as we know something different, we'll share that with the community.
So, I mean, if it were the situation, I mean, like Sandra said, things change constantly. If it were not especially worse than now, the plan would still be for Egan to open, or are you kind of waiting for it to be better? I mean, like if it were today, would you be able to open?
That's what I am. That's what we are checking in with Santa Clara County Public Health with right now.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Emma Dorn.
Hi, Emma. Hi. Thank you for everything you're doing to get our kids safely back into the classroom. I know that that's a lot. I have one quick question. How will language instruction like French or Spanish work in the hybrid model?
Hi, Emma. I can answer that. That is something that is a priority for us within the electives. That's why we've built a block of elective time on their at-home days. We are still sort of, again, after the December 7th, we are still sort of in the works around how can we beef up our language instruction, understanding that there are high school implications of that middle school language. So in that regard, it is different from a semester-long elective. But I just want to assure you that for both the middle schools, that's a priority, that we provide intensive instruction in terms of the time as well as the quality for our students who have language as an elective. But we will share more information once we have the numbers. We are very mindful of the fact that we want our students to be prepared to be able to have that credit for middle school language and be ready for the high school, level 2 language as well. And we are also in contact with the high school around all of this too. And I will say this, that the high school is also in 100% distance learning. So they're mindful of what instructional planning they have to do when our students arrive there as well.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Atasa Shafa.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there.
Hi, thanks for spending your evening on this. So I have a couple of questions and one comment. The question is, presuming that there might be a shuffle of teachers come January, when this plan goes into, and I'm fully intending that this plan go into effect. I am like, every good vibe out there is intending that this happen. What would be, are the teachers actively trying to bring the classes to like a good stopping point or like a certain unit completion, so that if there's a shuffle, this can be done seamlessly? And kind of like a semester approach, is that the idea? That's my first question. If you want to answer it, and I can come up with my second one. Keith, are you answering? Thank you.
Yeah, I can just share. In short, the answer is yes, because we are using a key marking period at the end of the semester before we begin.
Oh, so it is actually already built in. Okay. And then the other one is, the meetups, it's kind of like Andy's question earlier, where it's a kid, when a student might have a preference, they might like some teachers. I know my daughter, there's teachers she doesn't have this year. She still gets on the meetups with them because she just misses them to say hi, right? Is there going to be some sort of hosting of meetups that continues? Because I looked at the model. I know this is thrown together as a sample, but is the idea of meetups going to continue such that they actually touch base with any teachers they need to, or any teachers they want to? Somebody answer.
Who's taking it on?
Hi there. You bring up some very valid points. We currently wanted to maximize instructional time for the time we had with students when they were on our campus and also after they got home, and wanted to also maximize actual instruction with their content area teachers, even in the afternoon. And so in our current model, we didn't build those sort of more flexible meetup times, just because we are in a situation where we want to maximize every amount of instructional time we have with students. But you make a very valid point. Definitely we can think about it, but I will say that we sort of reviewed many different models too. But we felt like we really needed students to have actual live instruction with their content area teachers in this hybrid model. And thank you for the good vibes for us to come back.
I wanted to, just a follow up to that is maybe there's an option to put some meetups on the Wednesday, because it's all virtual and it's just a drop-in, and I mean, literally there's been benefit to having a teacher and ask a quick question or something, which might not be built into the structure when they have 20 kids on the class or 40 kids, So the meetup is, I suggested other stuff that I think I see is already being implemented. So I was going to suggest like have a meetup drop-in time on a Wednesday. Then, it doesn't take away from the teacher's time much. It's half an hour in a day, maybe a half an hour each teacher. that was my suggestion. And then the only comment I had is the slide deck. It's a little confusing and it took me a while. I was actually trying to do the math to see how the number of minutes added up, because you have science, comma, history, comma, English, and elsewhere you have virtual elective slash PE, and slash usually is either or. The math didn't add up, and I realized you might be intending it to be like a comma or both of them, or are you intending it to say, when you say elective PE, is it either or? So sometimes there's a use of a comma, sometimes slash, and it got me confused. I was trying to do the math to figure out what's going on there. Someone can just maybe tell me or just edit. Is it intended to be either or? Like there's going to be 4 different blocks for elective and PE? Is that what, or is it one or the other? Keith, I think you're muted. You're saying something.
I think it's a either or, but it also is dependent on staffing and who's available at different times in the day.
The math didn't add up, like between 1 and 3 p.m., 2 35-minute classes, that didn't add up. So yeah, that's why I was thinking it was maybe intended to be both, but maybe it was a comma or slash. Anyway, I just wanted to confirm which one it was intended to be. So
yeah, I would just suggest don't rely heavily on the minutes right now, because sure, those can be adjusted as we get closer into it.
Okay, just trying to get a picture of that. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Our next speaker is CY.
Hi, I would like to ask, for those who are choosing to go virtual, is there any way they can, like, how would they do their laboratory work for science?
Well, I think I might be able to answer a little bit. I know out of my office right now, we're working with the science teachers, and I can't remember right now, it's either 8th grade or 7th grade specifically. For our elementary, we've been putting together some kits to go home on pickup days, and we're actually just starting to work with our junior high science teachers as well. So students can have some physical materials depending on their unit of instruction. So hopefully that will be something that we will continue to build out. So they will have kind of that real experience of some science labs along with some simulations and what have you. So a little bit more than just all virtual.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Joanne Chow.
Hello.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi, I have just a clarifying question. So our students today are not in fixed cohorts for their classes. I don't think they are. And so when they go back to school, not only would their teachers potentially change, but their classmates would change as well, right? I just want to clarify if that's the case. And then if I understand correctly, they'll be with the same students for all subjects. Is that how it will work? Thank you.
Yes, that's correct, Joanne. Their classmates will change because remember, we can only build cohorts that are 15 to 18 students. And yes, they will be with that same group of students for their entire actually schedule, in person as well as virtual. And that's because of our county requirements, as Mrs. McGonigal reviewed at the beginning, is that stable classroom cohort that stays together for the entire day.
I think it's possible, Bhavna, that they're at home, like their virtual only courses, math, right, will not be the same cohort as their in-person group.
Yes, that's correct. Yep. Again, we'll be able to have that as we get the December 7th numbers. Yep. But again, the primary health and safety piece here is that in-person instruction will be with the same group of 15 to 18 students.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Joanne.
Our next speaker is Ed Yu.
Good evening, Ed. You here? Can you hear me?
Hi, Ed. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Could you tell me more what it's going to look like when we're choosing the hybrid? That's what we're leaning towards. So with the county guidelines during the cohort in their classrooms, is it going to be like prison where they're going to sit there and can't interact? I mean, what is the advantage if they're just going to be imprisoned there? And are there opportunities, part of it is, are there opportunities to develop connections with their cohort while they're in person? Can you tell me how would that work? Thank you.
I can speak to that just briefly, Ed. Yeah, it's certainly not going to look like it would look like at a regular school year, because we have to maintain that 6-foot distance. But if you can imagine that often students start building relationships when a classroom climate encourages discourse and conversation, that's what we're hoping to achieve within the time that students are in, that when they're present with the teacher and with each other in that small cohort. Over time, you'll hear students having conversations, they'll have discourse, Socratic seminars, articulating their thinking and science reasoning. So there's a lot of conversation that we're going to leverage during that time. And so that's one way that we would encourage students to connect. And, you know, even within the stringent guidelines that we have, that is absolutely one way to encourage that conversation and, you know, positive school climate and building relationships in that aspect.
Will there be breaks in the in-person one? And then what happens in the break? Are they required to sit in their chair during the breaks? And I'm just imagining, how would they interact?
Yeah, well, as long as they're 6-foot distance, they can still interact through conversation. Obviously, it's not as easy to hear everybody with the mask on, as we all know, but if they're, you know, we didn't build in an example break into the schedule right now, but we anticipate a break between the first 2 periods of the day. One example of this, of how this could work, is a class is provided a specific zone to go to. And in a lot of our reopening operations meetings we've had, we've targeted specific locations for small cohorts to go to. And there's a lot of outdoor space as well. So as long, again, as they're maintaining that 6-foot distance, students could take a break, you know, with supervision in a location designated by the school with supervision, and they can still engage and still remain 6 foot feet away from each other.
And Ed, they will stay with the same cohort from their classroom, so they won't be able to mingle with other cohorts.
All right, thank you.
Our next speaker is Magdalena Constantin.
Magdalena, you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, here I go. Good evening. Thank you for working so hard on the path for reopening. I also have a 7th grader in Egan, and I have a few questions. One is a clarification question. There was a slide talking about extended day for at-promise students, and I have no clue what that means. Second one is with respect to sport clubs, in particular tennis. I think that used to be offered in spring. Is that still an option going forward for the sport clubs? And also, last question is with respect to the rationale for choosing math to be only virtual. You know, math is, I have this vision where during math class, students go on the whiteboard and maybe they are solving problems together. You know, how is math really, you know, gonna work as being a purely virtual class? That's it.
I can answer a couple of the questions. I think I didn't quite catch the first one, but I think you asked a question about tennis or after-school sports. Right now, after-school sports, they're on hiatus, and we're not doing them at this point. If the guidelines change and indicate that we can, that would be great to look into. But right now, that's not going to be an option.
Okay. The first question was with respect to, you had on one of your slides something talking about extended day for at-promise students, and I have no clue what that means. Can you explain what these at-promise students are?
Bhavna, do you want to talk about at-promise students?
Yes, absolutely. I can. I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you. That's a great question. so just overall, an at-promise student is a student who might be struggling, but would need that additional in-person support to be able to actually live up to the promise that they are capable of. And so our goal with that, and again, we are not all the way there yet with the details, but our goal with that is based on sort of what our teachers are seeing in their classrooms, our psychologists. We each have teams on our campus that are focused on supporting students. We might have a very small group of students who might be able to stay longer in person during their in-person day, so that we could provide additional distance learning support to them, even though they are taking their classes in a distance learning format after lunch, but may be able to do the distance learning class in a supervised environment on campus. Again, these are not decisions we make lightly. We really look at all the different factors on how the student is doing in their classes, what are their struggles. From an equity standpoint, we focus on students who might not have the resources or support at home and might need to do their distance learning on campus. And so, so we will be sort of collaborating with our teachers and our psychologists if there are students who might need that additional support to be able to provide that.
I see, thank you. And last question was with respects to math. Kind of what is the rationale behind having math purely virtual? I mean, come on, this is math.
I'm happy to start. You guys can chime in. It was a big conversation among the task force team around how we wanted to group students for their in-person time. And because when we return students in person, they have to remain in that same cohort. I think there was an overwhelming, if not unanimous, outlook that we did not want to group students for the vast majority of their classes by their math level, that we really value a heterogeneous learning experience for kids across the board.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Leanne Bacall.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is really basic, and I apologize if it's very repetitive. And again, kind of back to the beginning, I'm juggling, keeping in my head what the elementary school is doing, the middle school, and the high school. So although at some points it seems super simple, and then I go back to I'm completely confused in terms of these choices. You know, the elementary school, as we know, has a completely separate virtual school. The high school has a completely separate, or will possibly have, or maybe they have now, a completely separate online platform with completely different teachers. Now we're here with our middle school. At the moment, everybody is virtual. There's going to be this option going back January 20th, hopefully, to either this hybrid or staying virtual. With the new information that we've learned this evening from Ms. Narula, that there is a possibility, depending on numbers, that teachers might change. Is there any way of us understanding what is more likely to maintain consistency for our child with regards to teachers, whether they stay hybrid versus virtual? And I guess my question there is, we're all virtual right now. So if we decide to stay virtual, is that essentially staying the way we are now, potentially with the same teachers, or for sure that's completely different? I'm a bit confused on the way we're moving towards the two options.
I'll start, you guys can add. The single subject nature of junior high school teachers does not allow us to you talked about our elementary program, we can easily put, you know, kindergarten teachers in a virtual school because they teach all subjects. And so they can teach their group of kids in a virtual school or at Loyola. But when we talk about single subject teachers who teach 6 or 7 class periods over the course of a day or 2 days, it's much more challenging to say these few teachers are going to be virtual only teachers. So because of that, I don't know that we can really answer your question. I would anticipate that every student will have some type of teacher shift. We want to certainly minimize it. And but I think it's just the nature of the beast in shifting to the blended model.
Okay, so those kids who decide to stay virtual when the other children are in school, there will be am I correct? There will be a different sort of program set up for those kids to be seeing, of course, different teachers, right? Because a teacher can't be in 2 places at once.
Correct. So some of our teachers will likely teach several periods of in-person students and a period of virtual students.
I see.
During a day.
I see. And you can't tell us, you know, if you have a child that ideally stays with the same teachers, choose this model over this model. You can't do that.
No, I don't think we can.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Our next speaker is Dmitry Skolnick.
Good evening, everyone. I have a question. As we can see in the news, many schools in other parts of the country are going fully virtual, even if they were hybrid or in person many days. And also, I've seen basically teachers' unions around the country demand virtual only. Do we know any actual information about whether the teachers are going to return to school? Giving the changes from orange to purple bypassing red. So do we know if our teachers want to return to school?
I'll start, and Jeff, if you want to add, but we've been working closely with our teachers since last spring to look at what our reopening plans at elementary and at junior high school will look like. And as we've been rolling our students and our staff and our teachers back onto campuses, we don't anticipate any change based on the current circumstance. We continue to have a really positive relationship with our teachers and staff, and expect school to open when we're all ready to open.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, Sandra. Thank you.
Yeah, and it wasn't clearly said, but I assume it's true that whatever math level kids are, they will maintain this level during second semester, right?
Absolutely, Dimitri.
Yeah, thanks.
Our next speaker is Jennifer Krikili.
Yes, hi. First, thank you all very much. I know this is a very difficult puzzle, and so I appreciate you taking the time to put these pieces together. I'm a 7th grader in the virtual school at Egan, and I guess I have a couple questions. I know that they were saying that the PE/elective might be an either or, and the concern with hours for the language. So if my daughter is in Spanish, I am believing that probably means she won't have PE for the majority or the rest of the year. I just wanted to see if that was kind of my assumption was correct. And then also, I know you mentioned the 15 to 18 student count that they were going to cap it at, trying to find out if that was the same for the virtual cohorts as well, or just the in-person one. And Also for the at-home days, I noticed there's, obviously less synchronous work. So I was trying to find out if they're going to be supplementing with asynchronous work throughout those days. And finally, I just wanted to know, I know they mentioned that both Egan and Block are in the same meetings together, getting the same curriculum. I was trying to find out if the virtual school will still keep the Egan teachers and Egan kids together and the Block teachers and the Block kids together, or if there's a chance that they will be kind of mixed in together. Thank you.
Do you want me to go, or Keith, you want to go?
Sorry, I was trying to write it down. I didn't get all, I'm sorry, I didn't get all the questions. I will say that there is a possibility. We would love to keep the Egan students and Block students with their respective schools. But again, depending on the numbers, we might have to partner together to be able to make the proper sections work.
Yeah, and I'll add, my guess is, so that 15 to 18 cohort size for in-person, I would anticipate that the virtual sections will be more traditional in a 20 to 30 student class size. I don't know if you guys disagree.
That's correct. I mean, our 15 to 18 cohort size is driven by health and safety county requirements for in-person instruction and the classroom-based cohort. And so that is why we have that cohort size. But our virtual students who are learning at home will have a more traditional class size as they have right now.
Does somebody want to speak to the Spanish students having PE, or what you envision that might look like?
That one's a little bit trickier just because, again, staffing and what that looks like during the day. I would anticipate all students would have a minimum of 2 days of PE each week.
Yeah. And while we will be working closely with our language teachers to beef up like language instruction in general, and we've been sort of brainstorming on different options, but I just want to say that whether it is at Egan or Block, that's a priority for us, that our students are well prepared for their next level of language.
And I think your last question was around synchronous time on at-home days. So you can expect that for your either Monday, Tuesday, or your Thursday, Friday. Or if you are only remaining virtual, those 4 days would be synchronous, and Wednesday remains asynchronous with some work through learning plans or assigned work happening.
I was just trying to clarify that on certain days there's less synchronous time, depending on which schedule you're using. And I was just trying to find out if they will be supplementing work throughout the day, like synchronous work to kind of supplement for that time off.
I think it would be fair to say that students would have some work kind of for that traditional school day, and 8:30 to 2:30, 3 o'clock-ish.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Our next speaker is Eric Shu.
Before Eric goes, I just want to say that Laura is going to be our last question, and anyone who still has questions after that, we'll take them via email and get back to you that way.
So I was wondering, what happens, like you guys said you guys had to decide before December 7th whether you wanted to, like, which plan you wanted to do, but what if like something like happens between that time and like when school goes back in person? Is there like a way to change, like if your like parents get COVID or something, is there a way to like change it, or is it like set in stone, you can't change once the deadline passes? And my second question is, what if a teacher gets COVID? What is the plan for that?
So Eric, I can answer your first question there. we would really like you not to change your mind. So work with your family together to make a decision that will carry you through that January, at least until March, where the next change is possible. And if somebody in your household comes down with COVID, then we have a protocol around isolation. We follow the county guidelines, and you would just access your learning. You would not clearly go to in-person school. You would access your learning online through learning plans. Erin, do you want to talk at all about what happens when a teacher might get COVID and just our processes?
Sure. So depending on if they contract the virus, or if they are just a contact or a close contact, they would be quarantined at home. If they were able to, they would be able to teach at home online. And if the entire class was exposed or was a contact within the same situation as a teacher, they would just continue virtual with that teacher at home. If the teacher was the only one that was at risk or had been a close contact or had been exposed, then we do have substitutes that are available to come on campus. And all of those substitutes have taken part in our training, our health and safety protocols, and have agreed to be part of our district. And some are already here right now working with us. Did we share that we have a lot of volunteer staff testing as well? We're doing that on a regular basis at our sites with our partnership through El Camino.
All right, thank you.
Our next speaker is Cindy Zinn.
Cindy, you need to unmute. Cindy, I think you're not, your unmute is not working.
Hello.
There you go. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, sorry about that. I'm on my phone. I've never done a Zoom call from my phone. Thank you again all for all your hard work. I have, talking with other parents and myself, we're wondering if the protocols change that, with moving to purple, if things do change and, or you get a number of people who decide they want to stay virtual, would you ever keep the current schedule as is and not change to this new plan? People seem to be saying this, contrary to what I'm hearing today, but people I know say this schedule's working. My kids like their teachers, they're comfortable, they've gotten into routine, they're not ready for the next big change to happen. And I'm afraid now that we've gone to purple, more people will lean towards staying virtual. So I was wondering if there's ever a chance that all this planning won't happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand the question, Cindy. I guess that could happen if nobody wanted to come back in person.
Right.
Well, right. Well, what if it were 85% or 80%? Would you still make all these changes to accommodate the 20% when you have 80 who are happy with the situation as is?
So I think I think we'd have to see those numbers play out, but it is our goal to have in-person instruction for students in our school district.
That makes sense. I mean, I know my daughter would love it, but I'm not sure how I feel right now. And the whole change of it, she isn't one to be very open to being with 15 kids she doesn't know at all. New teachers also would be very unsettling. She's one who takes a long time to warm up. I feel very fortunate with the teachers we have. I know there's great teachers at Block. I've been there for 2 years. I do know that, but the change is also as unsettling and with the numbers. So I was just curious.
Our next speaker is Dita Gratzinger.
Unmuted. There we go. Thank you so much. So I love this term of at promise students. It's really, you know, kind of heartening. And I think you've already said that you don't have too many details on this potential extended day, but I would love to hear more about that. And for those students, particularly, you know, 8th graders who are going into high school next year and who haven't been able to make as much progress, I guess, does the school district have any plan to perhaps provide supplemental learning over this summer? Because I'm pretty concerned about a kid going straight into high school who has dropped behind.
Hi, Dita. Well, the summer feels like it is eons away with the way things have been going now, but I can point back to what we did last summer because we knew we ended the year kind of in a very crazy emergency remote teaching format. We did provide we did provide lots of practice opportunity for those key learning areas from the springtime. So we will certainly talk with teachers as we get closer to the end of the year. We're meeting with teachers regularly to talk about pacing to make sure that we're, kind of on track for the best learning that happens over the course of the year. And we can look to see what summer might look like and what the needs are as we get closer to that point.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ravid Erez.
Hi, thank you everyone again. Actually, I have an opposite question to the question before about 80% going virtual versus in person. What if it's actually the opposite and most of the kids want to go to this hybrid? Any chance that you will not have enough space for all the kids?
I think in our plans, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, that we were kind of working on the assumption of 100% people returning in person. I know our numbers at elementary have been, what, Jeff, about 80-20, 75-25, 70-30. They've kind of fluctuated.
About 70-30.
Okay, 70-30. So we will have to wait and see what the actual numbers are, but I do believe we can accommodate without making major modifications to the plan.
And then second question is if, whoever start in this cohort model and then for whatever reason, the county is deciding to shut down the school for whatever reason, the plan is to at least then stay with the same teachers, just virtual?
Yes, I believe that that is true.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Eric Spitzer.
Hi, thank you. So my question, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so my question is about high school placement for 8th graders. Particularly wondering about the case where an 8th grader may be changing teachers and how those recommendations might be made, given that those changes may occur pretty close to the time where a lot of those placement decisions need to be made.
May I ask a clarifying question? Eric, are you talking about the private school recommendations? Or
no, about high school, about recommendations and placements for high school for 8th graders.
So our public high schools have open enrollment. as far as math is concerned, your student will go into the next level math based on what their 8th grade level math class is, and that articulation chart is available. As far as sometimes students might ask about like science placement, and we typically don't provide any formal recommendation to our high schools about science classes. Both of our high schools, public high schools, have open enrollment. A student can choose to take biology or biology honors. A student can choose to take any class they would like that's available to 9th graders. So I wouldn't, we have never provided a formal recommendation to high schools about what their placement should be.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Kristen Najarian.
Hi, thank you all very much for the presentation. I know there's obviously a lot of variables and a lot of work that's gone into everything so far, so I appreciate that. I have 2 questions. One, if somebody does contract COVID, whether it be a student or a teacher, what happens to, or if it's a relative, a parent or a sibling, and so that the student or the teacher is exposed, what's the chain of reaction that happens at the cohort level? So is the whole entire cohort sent home and they're quarantined for 14 days?
Jeff, do you want to answer?
Well, I'll answer that. Hi, Kristen.
Hi.
So it really depends who has contracted COVID. If it is a student within a cohort, then that cohort will be quarantined for the 14 days, as well as the teacher. If it is those students and the teacher would be considered what are called close contacts by Santa Clara County Health Department. If it is, say, a parent of a student, the student is actually the close contact in that case, and that child will need to be quarantined. The rest of the cohort will not, because they are what are called contacts of a contact. If that child ends up testing positive at some point, then of course that first situation is triggered, where the child is actually the positive now and the cohort is a close contact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps a lot. And if there's a teacher, so the teachers are rotating and the students are not. So if one of the teachers that's rotating contracts it, do all of the cohorts that teacher rotates to, all of those students all have to quarantine?
That's correct.
I see. Okay, I appreciate that. And then secondarily, a separate question, Bhavna, you mentioned just briefly on recommendations. So if we have a student who will be applying to private schools for freshman year, if some of the teachers may be moving, and if the student reaches out to current teachers, will there be any sort of gap there if that, we'll call old teacher, gets a phone call or follow-up questions from the school that they're applying to, even though they're no longer their teacher?
Hi, Kristen. That's a great question. Typically recommendations are due January 7th, mid-January. I've been meeting with students about that whole process lately. There would be no issues because basically the student has listed her current teacher's name on the recommendation letter, recommendation form, the application form, and the teacher typically receives a confidential link to complete the recommendation. Let's say there's a follow-up question from a private school and we've returned into hybrid and the child has a different teacher. That doesn't impact because that teacher who completed the recommendation is still going to be answering that phone call. And is going to be providing any details that the private school might want, additional details over and above the recommendation letter. So I want to assure you that, first of all, all these recommendations are out to private schools well before January 20th. You know, our teachers typically a lot of time spend actually winter break writing those recommendations. Secondly, if there's a follow-up phone call, that whoever that student's teacher was will be able to speak to it, you know, if they need any additional information.
Okay, that's very helpful. I really appreciate it.
Our next speaker is Corinne Finnegan.
Hi guys, can you hear me okay? Hi, I have a 7th grader at Egan, and I just have a quick question. So since shelter in place started in March before the math placement test could happen, my understanding is that, and tell me if I have my facts right, that, you know, kids weren't really being able to be placed in math as they typically were. So some were, it seems like there's 2 groups. There's either sort of math 7, or there's kids that are perhaps, I think, in algebra now. And my question is, now that kids are a bit more known, is there any thought or consideration that's going to be given to create that 7-8 group that I don't think exists this year?
No, I'll take that one.
Okay.
No, we have planned this course to maintain as that new 7th grade math course. They are covering those critical standards for students to be able to go into algebra. And if students, you know, do well past those particular 8th grade standards, they would go into algebra. Otherwise, students will go into the 8th grade math class next year.
Okay, so there's basically one less math cohort this year. Is that right? There's no more 7-8. And if we go back to regular times in the future, will that 7-8 cohort return, or is that just a new approach?
This was our approach for this pandemic school year. So we will see what the spring looks like and what the fall will look like.
Okay. Yeah, my question was more like, in the spring, is there a possibility, or is this is it for the year, is what you're saying?
This is it for this year. Yep.
Okay, the academic year.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Laura Klug.
Good evening.
Hi, Laura.
Hi. Would you please explain the logistics, especially relating to the schedule, if one were to choose virtual for 3rd quarter and hybrid for 4th quarter?
Hi, Laura. Maybe I'll take that question. I'm just trying to visualize what that would look like as you're asking that question. So your student will have, basically, based on the numbers, we will build a set number of virtual sections into our schedule. Now, if you choose, your student chooses to return to hybrid in March, you know, as is understood, like, that student will no longer be in the virtual section anymore and would move to a hybrid section. And so there I would anticipate a schedule change. Let's say the student had 3rd period virtual English, but now you're back in hybrid, and the virtual English stays 3rd period. And now, you know, your student has 2nd period English. And so that would be a schedule change. If there are 2 different models chosen.
And I'll just add, Bhavna, in an ideal world, a full section of students would perhaps switch. So that whole section could move from a virtual to an in-person section, but that would only be ideal.
And then potentially also switching teachers then too.
Possibly.
Okay.
That's possible, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think it might be worth noting, if you're not plugged into the elementary world anymore, we have had, as we've gone through our markers of program switches just in the past few months, we have had many families changed their program from, even though we were all distance learning, moving from their homeschool to a virtual school, and have really successfully created those new relationships with new teachers and new classmates. And I have no doubt that our junior high students can't persevere through the same switches. All right, I think that was our last question. If anybody else has questions, I know I'm happy to receive an email. Jeff has been receiving emails, as have Keith and Bhavna. We really appreciate everybody being here tonight, and you can look forward to an email coming from Keith or Bhavna this week with the link to that Google form where you're going to, before or on or before December 7th, let us know your preference for a program starting, all hope, together on January 20th. So thank you. We appreciate you. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks so much. Bye.